What if I told you that the same year The Twilight Zone ended, a feature film written by Rod Serling aired on ABC with all the hallmarks of a Twilight Zone episode? Inexplicable occurrences, stunning visuals, strong performances, and a sense of Rod's moralistic viewpoint on the treatment of our fellow man. What if I told you that film also caused a national uproar that saw ABC and Serling himself receive thousands of letters in protest? This is Rod's haunting holiday special that was lost for decades. The highly controversial Carol for Another Christmas. To tell this story in full, we have to dig into the details of how and why this TV movie was made in the first place. Rod Serling's youngest daughter, Anne, talks about this short but significant chapter in her father's career in her memoir, As I Knew Him, My Dad, Rod Serling. In 1963, United Nations Ambassador Adlai Stevenson was roughed up in Dallas, Texas by a group suspicious of the UN's supposed true nature. The sentiment that the United Nations was actually a front to promote the spread of communism and establish a single worldwide government was a growing sentiment within the United States at the time. Troubled by this movement, UN Managing Director of Special Funds Paul Hoffman approached a PR specialist named Edgar Rosenberg to help facilitate a creative response. To properly explain to the public the organization's real mission values and goals, along with commemorating its 20th anniversary, Rosenberg conceived a series of 6 commercial-free dramatic TV specials. Everyone who worked on them were to be paid at scale minimum or pro bono, so no one would financially benefit. After having trouble finding a sponsor to front the bill of letting the specials air ad-free, Xerox agreed to support the series. Just as difficult, though, was securing a network for the films. Originally, the UN wanted CBS, NBC, and ABC to split the 6 specials, but fearing public backlash and other political consequences, CBS and NBC pulled out, leaving the American Broadcasting Company as the de facto home of each movie. Joseph Mankiewicz was announced as the director of the first project, set to air in December of 1964. It ended up being the only TV project Mankiewicz was involved in, with All About Eve, Julius Caesar, Guys and Dolls, and more already in his filmography. Rod Serling was then tapped to write, name actors like Peter Sellers and Eva Marie Saint were brought in to star, and they were off to the races. But none of them would be prepared for the aftermath. The premise for Carol for Another Christmas is of course based on Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, but with a debate about national isolationism and the consequences of societal neglect at the center of the story. I'll give a spoiler warning, but if you're familiar with A Christmas Carol, you already know the gist. A veteran and wealthy industrialist named Daniel Grudge,
Apparently he's got some kind of grievance with somebody. I don't know.
is still bitter at the death of his son Marley during World War II. It's Christmas Eve, the anniversary of Marley's demise overseas. Grudge has a strict hatred for any kind of international meddling, ranging from fighting wars in other countries to even cultural exchange programs. He uses his influence to put a stop to one such exchange at the local university, where an instructor named Jack Harris was to be sent off to Poland for one of their 18th century European literature professors. Confronting Grudge about this abrupt change of plans is his nephew Fred. Fred is on staff at the university and has a fraught relationship with his uncle. They often spar over U.S. involvement in foreign affairs. The younger man is of the mindset that where one suffers, we all suffer, and constantly urges his uncle to become involved in causes that will strengthen international cooperation and help those in need. After firmly stating their cases and commiserating over the anniversary of Marley's death, Fred leaves the house. Upon his nephew's departure, Grudge sees Marley silently appear in a reflection and sitting at the dining room table. A song Daniel was listening to earlier, Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree by the Andrews Sisters, begins to play upstairs. When Grudge investigates, the record player is turned off and the music stops. Back in the study, Grudge is transfixed by a glass chandelier and suddenly finds himself on a troop transport ship. A soldier calling himself the Ghost of Christmas Past shows off the ship's contents, the dead fighting forces of World War I. Somehow, it's 1918, and the ghost trades shots with Grudge about the pitfalls, pros, and everything in between of war. Staunch isolationism clashes with necessary interventionism when the safety of the world is at stake. The soldier states that the only way to stop the disease of war from spreading is to keep talking to each other. It's a viewpoint Grudge resents. He'd rather everyone keep to themselves and stop conflict with the threat of nuclear oblivion. The ghost mentions they've reached Grudge's stop and opens a door to Hiroshima, where Daniel once visited as a Navy commander after the bomb dropped in 1945. He and the soldier look on at the younger Grudge's interaction with his driver, Lieutenant Gibson, a doctor, and several children horrifically disfigured by the blast. Gibson's overwhelming pity is challenged by Grudge's urging to keep perspective. He makes the common argument that had the bomb not been dropped, there would be many more casualties on both sides. The lieutenant doesn't entirely disagree, but pushes back against Grudge's cold demeanor, saying he doesn't respect the human lives lost or the effects on the survivors. Daniel seems to then make a genuine connection with a scared little boy and leaves the devastation conflicted. After reliving the memory, Grudge is instructed to walk alone through a veiled doorway. Inside is his own dining room table, an island of light in a sea of darkness. There, one man dines on a full spread. This is the ghost of Christmas Present. He represents the entirety of the human race. Health, wealth, satisfaction, starvation, poverty, suffering, all run through him. He rings a bell and illuminates a barbed wire camp of displaced persons. Hunger and anguish abound. Grudge admonishes the ghost for stuffing his face in front of them, but this condemnation is returned in kind.
You never saw them while tearing into your mashed potatoes. They weren't actually there when you buttered your bread. There. Better, Mr. Grudge? Appetite back?
The ghost interrogates Grudge on his own neglect of those in need and calls it man in his normal condition. Daniel tries to defend humanity, but Christmas Present won't hear it. The camp is again brought into the light as its residents sing melancholy Christmas carols in different languages. From here, the ghost gets specific about how and why Daniel should help them. The statistics Grudge is so fond of are spelled out in great detail. Our main character is overloaded with guilt and can't stand to look at the personification of human hunger and agony. He snaps at his host and attempts to run off, but is stopped by the same barbed wire fences from the camp. A different voice then greets him in the middle of a destroyed town hall. Grudge climbs out of the floor and confronts the hooded ghost of Christmas future. The destruction has not yet come to pass, but it is a terrifying vision of what lies ahead. Showcased are the remains of a worldwide nuclear holocaust. Very few humans survive in this future, and those that do are split into several factions. The one in possession of the town hall is the self-proclaimed non-government of the Me People, led by a charismatic anarchist called the Imperial Me. Dressed in a Santa Claus suit on Christmas Eve, he riles up the crowd. It's a sermon meant to provoke attacks on other local groups who wish to talk with the Me People and establish peaceful relations. Imperial Me also speaks on the importance and power of the individual over all, what he calls the world of the ultimate me.
The word we will be stamped out and will become I forever.
The crowd rapidly accepts their leader's message. Just then, Grudge's butler Charles and cook Ruby arrive to try and plead for the greater good. Charles's words are rejected by the mob, who chase him up into the corner of the town hall where he's goaded to jump before being shot and killed by a young boy. The Me People mock his death with laughter and are led off by Imperial Me to dispose of their enemies. When they return, more violence is planned.
The killing of each other until there remains only the one individual me.
Stunned and angered by the world's degradation, Grudge questions Christmas future on his own fate. Does he live to see all this happen? And also, is this vision of what lies ahead set in stone or malleable? The ghost silently walks off, leaving Daniel clutching his cape and hitting the ground. We dissolve to Grudge on the floor of his study, hand gripping the curtain of an open door. It's Christmas Day, and the older man is confused to see he's back home. Fred arrives saying his uncle called him late last night, telling him to stop by in the morning. Grudge apologizes to his nephew for their latest spat. Daniel's eventful evening has left a heavy impression upon him, especially when it comes to children as hope for the future.
So long as there are children, I suppose there are possibilities.
So long as there are children, there have to be possibilities.
There must be involvement. Every man's death does diminish me.
After wishing Fred a Merry Christmas, Grudge walks into his kitchen to listen to the kids of United Nations delegates sing Christmas carols over the radio. He uncharacteristically takes his morning coffee with Charles and Ruby as the indication of a kinder man emerging from the previous night is suggested. The first thing that struck me about this movie when I started researching it was its sizable and well-known cast. Sterling Hayden, Steve Lawrence, Eva Marie Saint, Pat Hingle, Robert Shaw, and Peter Sellers were actors I was well aware of from projects like The Godfather, On the Waterfront, and The Blues Brothers. Earlier in 1964, Hayden and Sellers were united on the big screen for Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. It's just mandatory I point that out. Aside from his role as Commissioner Gordon and others over the decades, Pat Hingle was recognizable to me from a Season 4 Twilight Zone episode. It was good to see another of his performances from this era. Peter Fonda was supposed to have a slightly bigger role as Marley Grudge, but ended up being relegated to a reflection and portrait. He's not listed in the credits, yet several sources say he was playing the character, and that painting all but confirms it. Although, Gordon Spencer is listed as the younger Grudge on IMDb. Most of the performances here were pretty darn solid. My personal favorites had to be Steve Lawrence as the Ghost of Christmas Past and Peter Sellers as the scene-stealing Imperial Me. Even though he's the lead, Sterling Hayden isn't shown much at all in anything advertising the movie. It's either a picture of Sellers or, interestingly, Rod Serling himself, who are used in current promotional pieces. Hayden plays to his type as an uptight and overly serious grump in the tradition of Ebenezer Scrooge. His commanding presence and line delivery, combined with Serling's dialogue, makes for a bit of an uneven portrayal.
I want all the members of your various domestic and international orders of the Bleeding Heart to know precisely where Daniel Grudge stands.
A good portion of his long conversation with Ben Gazzara's Fred toward the beginning of the film doesn't showcase his best work. I think that's largely because the sequence is stretched to the brim with too much exposition and a debate we'd see play out in a much more thought-provoking fashion as the story rolled on. Once the ghosts started showing up, Hayden's performance improved as he defended his ideals in supernatural situations. Plus, this guy just had incredible facial expressions that made his quiet moments very loud. Joseph Mankiewicz and cinematographer Arthur J. Ornitz really knew how to capture the character's mindset without him saying a word. Serling's interpretation of the Christmas spirits were each compelling enough in their own way. I really like how much of a smartass Steve Lawrence's character is. He doesn't accept Grudge's stock talking points and pushes him in a way this character clearly isn't used to.
We stay on
Our side of the fence. Hey, you want to know something, pal? That ocean you call a fence keeps nothing out anymore. Well, a couple of supersonic bombers can spit over it.
When we get to Hiroshima, Lawrence also shows off a side that truly begins Grudge's change of heart. He reminds the older man of how compassionate he was capable of being.
A yellow child is a black child, is a white child, is a child. Can we agree to that much?
Pat Hingle's Ghost of Christmas Present is enjoyable and walks the line between lighthearted needling and full-on damnation of Grudge and mankind. I love the use of space in this scene with only the table and displaced persons camp seeing any light in the black void. It absolutely enhances Hingle's performance and his character's point. Unfortunately, there's a period where he goes on and on about specific statistics that make the whole movie feel more overtly educational and less effective on an emotional and narrative level.
13 million human beings have tuberculosis. There are 10 million blind. There are 130 million cases of malaria.
You're already showing all this in a very engaging way. We don't need to have the spirit list everything out so precisely. Using Grudge's fixation with numbers when it comes to human suffering against him still doesn't make these lines flow naturally. Maybe it was some kind of mandate from the UN, but I could see Rod really wanting to hammer the point home. Christmas Present isn't the ghost that Grudge has the best back and forth with, but it's clearly the spirit that gets to him the most. We see him snap in that scene, and it works out great. I love Robert Shaw as much as the next guy, and his performance was fine, but I didn't love this version of the Ghost of Christmas Future. The character is most interesting when he's less chatty and more ominous. Shaw's version is nothing but chatty.
The American town hall, you will remember, Mr. Grudge, was a microcosm of all the meeting halls of the world. Places where men could talk it over.
With Charles, the mob, and the Imperial Me, there's more than enough drama and entertainment to carry the scene, but again, it feels like they desperately needed to make sure we got the message.
What about the United Nations? It was supposed to keep the peace.
Sellers as Imperial Me is likely the most memorable part of the movie. This character was delightfully bombastic in his delivery and embodies extreme individualism at the cost of our own humanity.
We have now reached a pure state of civilization. The world of the ultimate me is finally within our grasp.
It's intriguing to see Serling explore this side of the coin when the importance of nonconformity and individualism were so prominent in several famous Twilight Zone stories. The Obsolete Man, Eye of the Beholder, and Number 12 Looks Just Like You are just a few examples. It shows that the extreme of either side can lead to ruin. Percy Rodriguez as Charles played an important role in opposition to how deadly, ignorant, and self-absorbed the future could be. His delivery of these essential lines is a bit theatrical, but the point is still well stated and taken.
The potential goodness of men, the potential morality of men, the capability of human beings to achieve dignity and decency.
The aspect I like most about Carol for Another Christmas is without a doubt the visuals. There are some spectacular shots, camera movements, and mise-en-scène on display here. How they utilize light and darkness reminded me of some of the more dramatic-looking Twilight Zone episodes, but with even more time given to make each moment look as perfect as possible. Bathing Grudge in half shadow the first time we see him was an excellent choice. The camera follows him up to his son's wartime awards encased in glass. Grudge's reflection, combined with the following close-up, tells us everything we need to know before this man utters a single sentence. Speaking of reflections, there may have been more to him in the original script, but I love how little we see of Marley. Most folks know the format of A Christmas Carol, so just hearing his name and seeing him show up mysteriously is all we needed to get things going. We can't quite make out his features in the window or when he's sitting at the table, and that worked well in the script with a few overlong dialogue sequences. The shot that brings us into the world of Christmas Past is one of the best in the film. Starting up at that glass chandelier moving on its own, the doors behind Grudge close as the lighting completely changes. The camera slowly moves in on Grudge as a puff of fog distracts him. By the next shot, we're on the troop transport. That scene's extended use of fog, rim lighting, silhouettes, and the ghostly soldiers surrounding the coffins is a tremendous backdrop to the spirit's sarcastic attitude. When Grudge looks out to see the soldiers from World War II floating by, their dark figures cut into the fog, making great use of minimalistic detail. I already spoke on how striking the Ghost of Christmas Present sequence was, but that fantastic transition at the end sealed it. Grudge runs away only to see himself trapped behind the barbed wire until he's called upon by his next visitor. Looking at his confined state and petrified expression is more effective than any statistic the spirit could spout. The town hall is a decent set, but the scene is carried by Peter Sellers' performance more than any particular shot. How he's presented does accentuate the unhinged nature of he and his followers, though, like when he leans into the camera almost distorting his features, or the euphoric expressions on the faces of the Me people that seem to feed into Imperial Me himself. There's almost no score at all in that entire sequence. They just let the madness of the situation create the mood, which brings up another positive attribute of this piece: music and the lack of music. This film really picked its spots on when to utilize an original composition by Henry Mancini. It's mostly low, foreboding tones that fit like a glove into each sequence, but it's not just Mancini's score. Diegetic music makes significant impacts on certain scenes, including Grudge's introduction. Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree is a great tease for something strange beginning to happen. It starts up again when Grudge sees Marley.
Don't sit under the apple tree.
Daniel is the only one who can hear the song. Later, the Ghost of Christmas Past plays a tune on his harmonica that's repeated a few times, but probably the most haunting part of the picture involves the little girls in Hiroshima singing under their veils and bandages.
Whenever there's thunder now, you always remember.
Dear God.
In the Ghost of Christmas Present segment, the people in the camp of course sing a few emotionally driven melodies in other languages. Fused with the little girls singing in Hiroshima, this comes back around at the end when we hear a group of international children singing joyously over the radio. What were songs of sadness and desperate hope now provide positive feelings for the future. The Imperial Me is played in and out of the town hall by a one-man band, which adds to the surreality of that sequence too. Rod's script for Carol for Another Christmas is a decent effort, with a few great moments and an admirable intention behind it. As I stated earlier, its negative aspects lie in extended diatribes that only really show up prominently in the beginning exchange with Grudge and Fred, then later with the Ghost of Christmas Present. The UN is also name-dropped more than once, which seemed a tad indulgent. In addition to Marley having a speaking role, the original script had Grudge's first name as Benjamin, so his name could be read as B. Grudge.
Apparently he's got some kind of
A name change was requested by ABC. I think that was the right call. They also didn't want people to think Grudge's initials were meant to directly call out presidential candidate Barry Goldwater. It's difficult to not compare this piece to one of Serling's Twilight Zone episodes. While overall it works okay at 86 minutes, I feel like it could easily be cut down to the TZ standard of 25. If you want to see what Carol for Another Christmas would look like as a half-hour Twilight Zone episode, complete with the theme song, credits, and a Rod Serling narration, let me know in the comments. I think that'd be a really fun project. Would this movie be written the same way today? I don't think so. Maybe from the dramatic side of things and the insistence on talking to stop fighting, but a lot has happened with international relations since 1964. Changing attitudes toward U.S. involvement in foreign wars make this a very murky topic to showcase in our day and age. However, for the time, it tried to take the noble approach of focusing on the moral implications of neglecting our fellow man instead of the practical reality of warfare, and that each conflict presents a unique set of circumstances to consider. I have to respect Serling's straightforward plea to shake our shoulders and force us to confront these injustices. What seems to be most constructive in getting people involved in a cause is to play to their emotions. That's why narrative movies and TV shows can touch the masses. Ultimately, there's a mix of sentiment, cold information, and repeated arguments of the time period that make the effectiveness of this piece a mixed bag for me. Carol for Another Christmas aired on December 28, 1964. The immediate reactions from audiences and critics were loud. Rod Serling, ABC, and Xerox received thousands of letters and telegrams containing the public's thoughts on the movie. The groups who were already opposed to the UN flooded mailboxes with accusations against anyone involved with the film. They were all helping to further the international organization's supposed communist subversions and one-world government ideology. Xerox and ABC stood their ground, claiming there were just as many positive letters as negative ones. Serling was initially shocked by the negative reaction. At first, he actually answered much of his hate mail with long and thoughtful responses. Rod was trying to reach out and change minds directly. He sure was a fascinating and clearly determined fella. You have to give him props for facing all of that head on. Critical reviews were mixed, but that didn't stop the movie from receiving a pair of Primetime Emmy nominations in 1965, one for Gene Callahan and Jack Wright Jr.'s art direction and set decoration, the other for outstanding program achievements in entertainment. Of the original 6 United Nations TV specials planned, only 4 were completed, with one abandoned mid-production. Still, none seemed to be as controversial or stir up as much conversation as the first. After it initially aired, Carol for Another Christmas wasn't rebroadcast until nearly a half-century later. In that lost period, the film could only be viewed at the Paley Centers for Media in New York City and Los Angeles, as well as within the UCLA Film and Television Archives, although some education prints and bootlegs were out there. Turner Classic Movies reran the film for the first time in 2012, and it's appeared on the channel several times since. A DVD was released in 2016. I picked it up on Amazon, but the quality is quite poor. Fortunately, as of the posting of this video, the film is available in full HD on the Max streaming service and YouTube. Comparing the DVD to the streaming versions is really night and day. The restoration on the streaming release does a great job of showcasing the marvelous work achieved with these visuals. While I don't think this TV movie reaches the heights of its potential and can feel too long and preachy, there's a lot here I like. Plus, there's such an interesting backstory to it. If you're a big Twilight Zone or Rod Serling fan, I would affirmatively recommend watching it for yourself. In a deluge of Christmas Carol adaptations, this is far from being just another.